Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're coming to you from a driveway in Wyoming where we are mooch docking my brothers. We've been doing quite a bit of driving lately and not enough enjoying life, but we thought we'd come back to you with one of the things that we get a lot of questions about is we encourage and we like to answer questions about the camper, how we built it, how we like it or how we don't like it. So this session is going to be about the things that, based on what we now know, what we would have done differently. And this is hopefully aimed at those people who are getting ready to do their own build, that you can learn from our mistakes and you can do one better. I'm all about improving things, and although some of these regrets we're about ready to outline are fixable, some of them aren't, and some of them are just too much work to solve a problem. And again, had I known now what I needed to know then, I would have made a different choice. But that is, engineering is all about choices, and you just hope you make the best ones, and inevitably you'd hope you don't paint yourself into a corner where you can't make a change.
So in addition to the regrets, we actually have a long list of things that we plan to do to Maximus that we still haven't done. And what we decided is maybe once a month we're going to have this little conversation with you and share the details of what's going on with Maximus and in a little more complete video. So that's what this is. This is number 2. We did a confessions video earlier of things, are they really working as expected? This is our regrets list. And then we'll move on to what is actually planned or what's not done yet for Maximus, and talk about those things too. And we really appreciate everyone coming into the channel and checking us out. We've been slowly and steadily growing on subscribers, and really appreciate that. And if you have any questions about the rig, please ask in the comments below, because Steve is happy to answer any of those. He loves spending time on that and interacting with people who are interested in how and why we did things, or even asking for recommendations for their own modifications.
One of the regrets that I regret doing is I started off this project by first buying the single rear wheel F350, knowing what its weight capacity was, both real and specified by the manufacturer. And I just kind of committed to myself, says I don't want to go through all the expense of getting a dual rear wheel, converting it to super singles, although it would have been a better turning radius. I said I'm just going to try to stick to the weight limitations that I have with a single rear wheel, and that has been quite a challenge. And I think the challenge, and I'm at the point now where the truck is just slightly over the gross rear axle weight, and yeah, not by very much, but more than makes me comfortable. And I still want to add a few things to the truck. And so I'm now faced with what I will probably have to do is move my spare tire from the rear wall of the camper to the front center of the truck to put some load on the front wheel and relieve some load from the rear wheel. I'm still very happy with the truck. We've been running this way for 6, 7, 8,000 miles, and I think what I'm going to compromise at is simply I'll change the wheel bearings every year. Always use premium wheel bearings, and that's just, I think, the way I'm going to handle it, because my other option is to upgrade the truck. And if the truck should ever fail to the point where it's not economically repairable, I may well do that. And again, that would be a huge expense of both buying a new truck, upgrading to super singles. The super single problem is also complicated in wheel diameter, which is another problem that I have, in that I can't put bigger than a 35-inch wheel on my camper without interfering with the bag boxes that I have built. And so it might involve rebuilding bag boxes. They're not really scalable. I couldn't cut them down. I'm going to have to probably replace them entirely if I needed to upgrade a wheel size. So if I had started off with a little bit bigger I wouldn't be presented with this, although I knew I was going to put myself in a situation where I was forced to keep my weight down, and I felt like that motivation was a good thing to have. I kind of surprised by all these guys going out and buying an F550, which weighs 14,000 pounds curb weight, or 13,000 pounds curb weight, where my truck weighs about 6,800 curb weight. And you're carrying all that load around you with you, which is a fuel economy thing, and it's a cross-country mobility thing because you just got more weight on tires. So anyway, that's the conundrum that I'm in, and it is a regret.
Well, if you followed us for a little while, you know that we tow an old Jeep Wrangler. And on the old camper setup, we never needed mud flaps. So when it came time to redo the hitch setup with Maximus and towing the Jeep, that's all we did is we got the hitch ready and we took off towing the Jeep. But boy, did we create a big problem. The old Lance camper was an model 1130, so 11 foot long, and it hung long, extended beyond the truck bed, which meant any rocks that the tires kicked up would never hit the Jeep. But with Maximus, we have a 30-degree departure angle on the back, so of course everything gets kicked up from those tires and lands straight on the front and the hood of the Jeep. So lots of chips, but the worst problem was we took a 2-day gravel road trip with Maximus, which was really fun, by the way, but after the first day of driving, we realized that this was a huge problem because we had about 5-10 windshield chips,
somewhere between 5 to 7 windshield chips, not to mention a few paint chips on the Jeep too.
Yep. So needless to say, the rest of that trip we drove separately. We did not tow the Jeep. When we got back to the shop, Steve found the mud flaps he wanted to put on and got those installed, and I don't think we've created any new problems since. So that's a regret.
Mud flaps. What I was thinking is that my rear cargo boxes hang down.
Low enough.
They're very close to the tire and quite low, and so they certainly had some capacity to block rocks. But again, I have a 30-degree departure angle, and it leaves a large target zone for rocks which come off the very bottoms of the tires to fly up and hit the Jeep, and they do.
Yep. So we have that fixed now, but that definitely is a regret.
If you've done something like I've done, which is to remove the rear overhang of the camper to increase your off-road mobility, you need mud flaps. And my mud flaps hang down about 3 inches from the ground, and that might even be a little bit lower than they need to be, but because again, everything coming off the bottom of the tires can clear the 30-degree departure angle I have.
Do you want to tell them what kind of mud flaps you use?
Oh, I used Rock Tamer mud flaps. This is I was able to find a single Amazon return of a single Rock Tamer mud flap, and I was able to cut that large mud flap into 2 correctly sized mud flaps for my use, and they work great.
Yep.
One other regret that I have is that my cargo boxes are too close to the tire, and this was an error in planning, but it was more an error in planning of what tire sizes I was going to need. And this kind of dovetails into the whole issue with the rear axle and its load capacity. This truck is stock from the factory with 16-inch wheels, which have a 31.5-inch outer diameter. I knew that that's not the wheel that I wanted to ultimately have. I wanted to have what I found later was a 2018 wheel, which had a heavy wheel and a decent enough tire that was 34 inches in diameter. And so that's what my bag boxes were designed to accept. It was a 34-inch tire. The problem being, when I got around to, I needed a high load index tire. The load index of the 34-inch tire was only 124, which is about 3,625 pounds, which was, in my opinion, not enough for the weight the camper was going to need to carry. So in searching for a tire with a much higher load index, I wanted something right about 4,000 pounds, which is about the biggest, heaviest tire you can find in a truck tire. And unfortunately, the only one I could find was a 35-inch tire. And so now my wheel well was really crowded with a 35-inch tire. The tire carries 4,080 pounds per tire, which is what I needed to be at. But I hadn't planned on that space, and I'd already built the cargo boxes by the time I really got down to brass tacks of picking the tires. And so I put myself in this situation by trying to make my cargo boxes as big as possible and not allowing enough space. So I have about 1.5 to 2 inches between the wheel and the cargo boxes today. And if I were to try to put chain type tire chains on there, I would beat the snot out of my cargo boxes. I could probably put cable chains on there, and that would be probably acceptable to me. And again, because I have a weight issue, if I'm ever carrying tire chains, cable chains is probably the right ones to carry anyway, since they weigh far less than chain type chains. Anyway, it's a regret. Not really going to do anything about it.
Who says we're ever traveling in that much snow that we need chains?
We built,
you forget who you're traveling with.
Right, I forget my fair weather wife. But
so on Maximus, we have 2 hatches, a side entry door, and no opening windows. So to create airflow, we typically open up the hatches and a combination of roof fans. Sometimes we'll even leave the side entry door open as well. But of course, you've got to handle insects and bugs, especially flies and mosquitoes. So I created screens out of mosquito netting. It's edged with webbing, and we use snaps to secure it to the openings. And it actually works pretty well. With mosquito and flies, it's definitely sufficient. However, through the summer, it's our first time out with these screens, we regret not using denser no-seam netting. Initially, we thought the main problem to solve was create a better side barrier, so where the screen attaches to the camper with the snaps, there's a gap. And sometimes we had bugs just being able to crawl through there. Not too many. Most of the time, things that just fly don't bother crawling. But then we got into areas where we had the really super tiny flies and bugs, not even biting ones, just annoying
biting.
Ones. But they could get through the netting.
And the problem I think we created for ourselves is if we leave the hatches open after it starts to get dark and we have a light on inside, it really attracts some of these small flying insects, and they can go right through the fairly coarse mesh.
What do you mean we, Tonto? I think that was you.
Yeah, somebody goes to bed earlier than the other.
Someone stayed up late one night and left the lights on. Man, it was like a zoo in here. But here, wait. I'll show you our favorite tool in the camper. It's right here. The favorite tool, fly swatter. So the regret is that we didn't utilize the denser netting. It was a trade-off of better airflow with what we used versus blocking the tiny small insects. And now I have a winter project, which will be to either retrofit the screens or replace them and figure out a better solution.
One of the key parts of the heating system and cooling system that I have in the camper is that I have a false ceiling with air ducts in it that I use to pull air from the bunk back to the rear of the camper and just create a circulation front to rear. When I first built it, I cheaped out and I grabbed some computer centrifugal fans that I failed to fully inspect the dBA rating of the fans, and when I put them in, they were very noisy. And they were so noisy, I literally wasn't going to be using them. I did have a speed control on them to hope, because I suspected they might be noisy at max speed, but I suspected also I might be able to be happy with their ventilation capacity at a lower speed. Not true. They were far too noisy at any speed, and I wouldn't abide them. And I have them mounted in the very rear of the camper, and with an intent is that if they were running at night and we were trying to sleep, at least the noise was all the way in the back of the camper. As a matter of fact, it's right above the indoor unit of the mini split air conditioner, because the intake of the mini split is in the top, and my intention was to discharge this air from the bunk right into the top of the air conditioner. Performance-wise, they worked adequately. They weren't particularly powerful. I knew they wouldn't be, but they were particularly noisy. So I jerked them out of there, and just in a knee-jerk reaction, I replaced them with a bladed computer fan, which was quieter, but I also knew that the static pressure that I needed to draw air through these 20-foot long ducts that were about 2 inches tall and about 5 inches wide, they would probably not move very much air, and they don't. They are almost ineffective at creating air circulation. So I have sit down and I said I knew I should have started off this way with a very good cross flow squirrel cage is what many of you know it is, a cross flow fan. I've got the right one now, and it's a project for the next couple days to put it in, and it is I'm quite sure is going to be effective and quiet. So that it's what Steve does every once in a while. I take the easy cheap route, hoping for success, almost never succeeding, however. So I don't learn very well, evidently.
Yeah, you do. It was very obvious, though, when we first set out in June this summer and ended up driving through 120-degree Nevada temperatures and had to camp overnight. By the time we even parked at 9 p.m., the camper was still like 95 degrees.
Sweltering, yeah.
It was a nightmare. And that fan, if it was effective, it would have cooled off the bunk for us to go to sleep,
Yeah.
but that did not.
It's an essential part, so just to recap, my air conditioner is on the back wall of the camper. My furnace is on the floor underneath the kitchen cabinet. So in order to heat and cool the bunk, this circulator needs to function. Now I have pretty good insulation in here, so I don't end up with great extremes. It doesn't get really hot, but it gets uncomfortably hot, and we noticed with the first circulator we were in the heating season, so it worked adequately to bring heat into the bunk. It's just that when I put the second set into the fans and we were in the air conditioning season, that does not work adequately.
Now this is actually a little bit of a silly regret, but Steve's design included space for a small lavatory sink, and although we considered something lighter and more practical, we both opted for this quadrant porcelain sink. I use it for hand washing, teeth brushing, and Steve rarely uses it, maybe sometimes for a spit bucket. But simply because it's trade-off of weight and space versus usability or how often we use it, we both agree it's an item that we would just simply skip, and we regret putting it in.
Yeah. It really doesn't take any room that we would use for another purpose. So it's not bad from that perspective, but it was, an effort to procure and to install and to, to use, to keep clean, to plumb it, etc. Yeah. So we like it well enough. We'll keep it, but
it won't get ripped out.
If we had to do it over again, we would have just, competed for the kitchen sink. Part of the duality of it is a lot of times when somebody's working in the kitchen, that's when the other time somebody's either,
needs bathroom,
conducting personal hygiene or doing that. So it is serving a function, and it is not useless.
It's barely useless. It's probably the least use. Well, I could think of one other least use thing in the camper, but that's probably the second least thing.
And one other.
I like it. Until next week, thank you for joining us and checking out our custom camper and travels. We greatly appreciate hearing from you, especially getting questions on the rig. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to follow our rig projects, repairs, and updates, along with our somewhat meandering travels in the new rig. We are here to share and inspire others who are building and traveling in RVs. Comment below on what you might like to see more of. More Maximus projects, travels, campsite reviews, just life on the road, or maybe simply road trip travel tips. We're open to new content ideas. We hope to see you out on the road, and good luck with your working and exploring.